Imagine being a respected judge, cruising through your own neighborhood, when suddenly you're pulled over by a cop, who, without hesitation, assumes you've stolen your own car. What would you do? What if, despite your accomplishments and authority, you're treated like a criminal simply because of your race? And when the truth finally comes out, how do you think the officer will react when they realize who you truly are? This shocking tale will make you question, how often does this happen? What does it truly take for justice to prevail? But before we dive into this emotional journey, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Isaiah Carr carefully brushed a speck of dust from the dashboard of his brand new Lexus. It was only a week old, but he treated it like a priceless treasure. The leather seats still gleamed with their factory shine, and the soft hum of the engine beneath him was the sweet sound of satisfaction. He had just left the courthouse, his long day of back-to-back hearings and paperwork finally behind him. The weight of other people's problems had taken its toll, but this drive, this simple ride through the quiet tree-lined streets of Winterdale, Michigan, was his sanctuary. It was his time to decompress, to reclaim some sense of control after a hectic day. The calm streets, dotted with grand homes tucked far from the road, were a sharp contrast to the tension he often faced at work. But just as Isaiah began to lose himself in the soothing rhythm of jazz on the radio, the peace shattered. Blue and red flashing lights pierced the tranquil evening air. His heart skipped a beat. He glanced in the rearview mirror, recognizing the unmistakable sight of a police cruiser tailing him. His grip instinctively tightened around the steering wheel. His mind raced as he pulled over, confused but compliant. The neighborhood around him was serene, far removed from the chaotic city life. He hadn't been speeding. He was driving well under the limit, savoring the quiet. So, what could he possibly have done wrong? A sharp knock on the window broke through his thoughts. Isaiah turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered officer standing there, her face unreadable, her hand dangerously close to the gun holstered at her side. License and registration, she barked, no greeting, no courtesy. Isaiah's mind spun. This wasn't just any officer. This was a fellow member of his community. He was a judge, Isaiah Carr, respected and known throughout Winterdale. He had presided over cases involving her department, for goodness sake. Yet here he was being treated like a criminal. "Ma'am, there must be some misunderstanding," Isaiah explained calmly. "I'm Judge Isaiah Carr. This is my car. I live just down the street." The officer didn't even glance at him. Officer Rhodes, as the nameplate read, snatched the papers from his hands, barely sparing him a look as she scanned the documents. Her eyes darted back and forth between the paperwork and Isaiah, as if trying to find something that would confirm the worst. "Step out of the car," she ordered, her voice steely. "Excuse me." Isaiah blinked in disbelief. "Out. Now." Her voice was harder this time, leaving no room for argument. A knot tightened in his stomach. He was still processing the situation, still reeling from the surreal shock of it all. He wasn't just a random guy on the street. He was a judge, a figure of authority in this very community. Yet, none of that seemed to matter to Officer Rhodes. Swallowing his frustration, Isaiah stepped out of the car. He didn't want to escalate things. He had to remain calm. But as he stood there, humiliated in front of his neighbors who were now peeking through their curtains, watching this unfold like a scene from a bad drama, his patience wore thin. As she circled him, her eyes scanning him, as if he were the criminal she suspected him to be, Officer Rhodes casually muttered, "I've had reports of a stolen vehicle matching this one." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "This is my car. I bought it from the dealership just a few days ago. Run the plates. It'll come back clean." But Officer Rhodes wasn't listening. Or maybe she didn't care. Her hand rested on the hood of his car, and the sharpness in her voice was unmistakable. "Hands on the hood." "Officer, this is unnecessary," Isaiah protested, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I've done nothing wrong." Her eyes glinted with something that made Isaiah shiver. Was it suspicion? Or something worse? "You're going to do as I say, or we'll have problems," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. Isaiah's blood boiled. He was a judge. His whole career was built on understanding the law, on upholding justice. Yet in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. He had no choice but to comply. He placed his hands on the hood of his car, feeling the weight of the eyes on him. Neighbors still peering out from behind their curtains, silently judging him. The humiliation was unbearable. His entire life had been dedicated to proving his worth, to earning respect. And yet here he was, reduced to nothing more than a suspect. With rough hands, Officer Rhodes began patting him down, her movements brusque, dismissive. We've had reports of car thieves in this area. This vehicle matches the description of one stolen last week. Isaiah's fists clenched. I told you I bought this car just days ago. I'm not a thief. Save it for the station, she snapped, reaching for her handcuffs. His heart pounded in his chest. He was losing control of the situation, but his voice remained steady, his words deliberate. Officer Rhodes, I suggest you call your superior before you make a decision you'll regret. Her eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe that? Isaiah locked eyes with her, unwavering. I expect you to do your job properly. Run my information. Verify who I am. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, and she stepped back, frustration bubbling in her movements. She reached for her radio, muttering something into it, still eyeing him like he was the criminal. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Isaiah stood there, his hands still on the car, while Officer Rhodes waited for confirmation over the radio. The tension was palpable, suffocating. It was as though the whole world was watching. Finally, the radio crackled to life, and a voice on the other end cut through the silence. Rhodes, stand down. Judge Carr is a respected member of this community. I'm on my way. Isaiah exhaled, the knot in his chest loosening. But the damage had already been done. The public shaming, the unwarranted suspicion, the erosion of his dignity. No apology could undo that. Officer Rhodes, her face flushed with embarrassment, lowered her radio and muttered a soft, I'm sorry, Your Honor. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Isaiah straightened, his composure returning, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. A misunderstanding, he echoed, his voice calm but cutting. That's what we're calling racial profiling now, officer? Before she could respond, another police car pulled up, and Captain Reynolds, the head of the local precinct, stepped out. He was visibly shaken, his expression one of genuine regret. Judge Carr, he called out. I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Rest assured, we'll get to the bottom of it. Isaiah nodded, but his mind was already spinning. This wasn't just about him. It was about the countless others who had faced this same injustice. And as he stood there with Captain Reynolds offering his apologies, something clicked inside him. He had a choice. He could walk away, let this go, or he could turn this moment into something bigger, a chance to challenge the system and bring about real change. I want to speak with you and Officer Rhodes, Isaiah said, his voice steady, firm. Not as a victim, but as someone who believes we can turn this into an opportunity for change. Captain Reynolds was taken aback but nodded. Of course, Your Honor. Whatever you need. As they walked toward Captain Reynolds's car, Isaiah couldn't help but wonder. Could this moment, the one that had started as a public humiliation, be the spark that ignited change? Could this be the beginning of a much-needed conversation about justice, about prejudice, about truly seeing one another for who we are, and not the color of our skin? Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change his life, and the lives of many others forever. Later that evening, Isaiah sat in the comfort of his home, the walls of his house offering little relief from the weight of the encounter with Officer Rhodes. Every word, every moment played on a loop in his mind. Denise, his wife, walked into the room and immediately noticed the tension in his posture. Isaiah, what's wrong? She asked, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Isaiah sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. You won't believe what happened today. I was pulled over, accused of stealing my own car. Denise's eyes widened in disbelief. Here, in Winterdale? Yeah, by one of our own officers, Officer Rhodes. She had me get out of the car, hands on the hood. The whole humiliating drill. The neighbors watched, curtains moving, but not a word from anyone. Denise's face shifted from concern to anger. Isaiah, this is unacceptable. You're a judge. They know you. And that's exactly the problem, he replied, his voice quiet but intense. None of that mattered in that moment. None of it. Not my title, not my position. I was just a black man driving a fancy car. He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But this is bigger than me. This is bigger than one incident. This is systemic. And I'm going to make sure something changes. I can't let this go. Denise nodded, her gaze unwavering. Whatever you need, we'll do it together. And so, as the night settled in, Isaiah made a decision. A decision that would push him into uncharted waters. He would challenge the system that allowed such racial profiling to persist in their community. It was time for the truth to be told. It was time to be the voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. Isaiah Carr had faced injustice on a personal level. But now, he was ready to fight for something much larger than himself. This wasn't just about a stolen car. It was about reclaiming dignity. The storm brewing in Isaiah's life was relentless. He had to be smart. It wasn't just his reputation on the line anymore. It was his life. The deeper he dug into Apex Builders and the police department, the more perilous his situation became. Aaron had made it clear. They were running out of time. And now, with those in power aware of his investigation, Isaiah had no illusion. They'd try to silence him before he could dig any deeper. He glanced at the clock. Midnight was fast approaching, and the house was eerily quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of floorboards settling, nothing more. Denise had already gone to bed, but Isaiah couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of discoveries, and their dire consequences. He needed more concrete evidence, something undeniable that would shatter everything wide open. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, people he could trust. And there was only one person he knew would stand by him when everything got messy. The next morning, he met with Aaron in a small, secluded park on the edge of town. The early sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the air was crisp with the promise of fall. Aaron was already there, pacing by a bench, his brow furrowed with worry. He barely looked up as Isaiah approached. "Thanks for coming," Aaron muttered, shaking his hand as they sat down. "I don't have much time. But we need to talk strategy." Isaiah scanned the park, ensuring they weren't being watched. His nerves were on edge. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice tight. "Worse than I thought," Aaron admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've been laying low, but I've heard enough to know they're onto us. They've been watching me too. We don't have much time." Isaiah leaned in, lowering his voice. "We need the internal police records, everything. Anything tied to Apex Builders. And communications between the officers involved. That's the only way we can expose this." Aaron nodded, his face grim. "I'm working on that. I've got a chance to get into their database, but it's risky. If anyone catches wind of it, it's over for both of us." Isaiah rubbed his temples, the weight of the stakes pressing down on him. He couldn't back out now. Too many lives had already been ruined by this corruption. "We'll keep it small," he said, voice steady but resolute. "You, me, and maybe one or two others we can trust. We'll gather the evidence, and when we have it, we go public. Media, the Attorney General's office, someone who can't be bought." Aaron's eyes hardened with resolve. "I'll get started tonight, but we need to be ready for anything. If they find out we're going public, they'll come after us with everything they've got." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I know, but they won't scare us off." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Winterdale, Isaiah sat down with Denise, revealing everything. As he spoke, her face grew more serious, her concern palpable. When he finished, she shook her head in disbelief. "Isaiah, it's dangerous. These people are powerful. What if they try to hurt you?" "I can't back down now," Isaiah replied, his voice steady. "If I don't do this, who will? I've seen what they're capable of. They're ruining lives, and no one's holding them accountable." Denise took a deep breath, her eyes filled with both fear and pride. "Just promise me you'll be careful. You have a family, Isaiah. We need you." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I promise." The following week was a blur, covert meetings, late-night phone calls, careful planning. Isaiah and Aaron worked tirelessly, gathering evidence without drawing attention. Every new lead uncovered painted a clearer picture. Corruption within Winterdale's highest ranks. Officers were taking bribes from Apex Builders, ignoring violations and falsifying reports. all while enriching themselves at the expense of workers and the community. Isaiah knew they were sitting on a powder keg. Just one spark, and it would explode. One evening, Isaiah received a call from Aaron. "I've got it," Aaron's voice barely a whisper. "The records, payments, emails, phone calls. It's all here." Isaiah's heart surged with adrenaline. "Where are you?" "The station," Aaron replied. "Printing everything out now. Meet me at the diner in 30 minutes. Isaiah hung up, his pulse racing. This was it, the moment they'd been working for. The evidence they had could blow the whole thing open, expose the corrupt officials, and bring justice. But as he grabbed his keys and headed out the door, a nagging sense of unease settled in his gut. Something didn't feel right. He arrived at the diner a few minutes early. The dim lights cast long shadows over the empty booths, and the quiet hum of the place felt almost too still. The waitress gave him a nod, recognizing him from previous visits, but said nothing. Isaiah slid into a booth at the back, eyes scanning the parking lot through the large front window. Aaron was supposed to be here by now, but there was no sign of him. His phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. "On my way. 5 minutes." Isaiah tapped his fingers on the table, nerves mounting. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Still no sign of Aaron. The silence felt suffocating. Another message came through. "They're on to me. Get out." Before he could react, the door to the diner swung open. 2 men in dark suits walked in. Their eyes locked onto Isaiah instantly. They weren't locals. The way they moved, purposeful and calculating, told Isaiah everything he needed to know. He was in danger. Isaiah's heart pounded. The men approached, their steps slow and deliberate. One of them spoke, his voice cold and commanding. "Judge Carr, we need to have a word." Isaiah backed away, his mind racing. He knew exactly what they wanted. He wasn't about to let them silence him. Without another word, he bolted for the back door, his feet pounding against the tile floor as he raced for the exit. The men shouted after him, but Isaiah didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He burst through the back door into the alley, cool night air hitting him like a slap. His heart hammered as he sprinted toward his car, parked just around the corner. But as his hand reached for the door handle, a strong grip clamped down on his shoulder, yanking him back. Isaiah spun around, ready to fight. But before he could throw a punch, a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Isaiah, it's me." It was Aaron, pale and drenched in sweat. "We've got to go. Now." Without asking questions, Isaiah jumped into the car, and Aaron followed, slamming the door behind him. "They know everything," Aaron panted, his voice tight. "We've been compromised." Isaiah's hands tightened around the steering wheel, his mind racing. "What do we do now?" Aaron looked at him, desperation in his eyes. "We need to go public. Tonight." Isaiah drove in silence, city lights blurring past as they sped toward the only place they could expose the truth. Without interference, the local news station. "This is it," Aaron said quietly, his voice tinged with both fear and resolve. "Once we get this out there, there's no turning back." Isaiah nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I know, but we have no other choice." They arrived at the station just after midnight. The building was eerily quiet, save for a few late-night employees working the graveyard shift. Inside, they flashed their IDs to the security guard, who barely looked up. Once inside, they were led to the studio, where the late-night news broadcast was being prepared. Lisa Chung, the sharp-eyed producer, greeted them with skepticism. "What brings a judge and a detective here at this hour?" she asked, crossing her arms. Isaiah wasted no time. "We have evidence of widespread corruption in the police department and city government. We need to go on air now." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof?" Aaron handed her the folder, his hands trembling. "It's all here, names, dates, payments. Everything." Lisa flipped through the documents, her eyes widening as she read. When she looked up, her expression was grave. "You realize what you're asking for, right? Once this airs, it's going to blow up. There'll be consequences for you. For everyone involved." Isaiah nodded, his voice steady. "We know. But it needs to be done." After a tense moment, Lisa closed the folder and nodded. "All right. We'll do it." Isaiah and Aaron exchanged a look of relief. But they knew it was just the beginning. Once the truth was out there, the fallout would be swift and brutal. The people they'd exposed would fight tooth and nail to keep their empire intact. Lisa led them into the studio, where Jeff Lawson, the late-night anchor, sat flipping through his notes. When Lisa approached, she said, "Jeff, we're going live with this. It's bigger than anything we've ever covered before." Jeff looked up, brows furrowed. As Lisa placed the folder on his desk, he began reading. After a few moments, he looked up, his face hardening. "This is real?" he asked. "Every word of it," Isaiah replied, his voice filled with purpose. "We need to tell the public before it's too late." The broadcast began, the tension in the air palpable. Jeff Lawson's calm voice rang out. The late-night phone calls, the anonymous messages, and the unsettling sight of strange cars parked outside their homes. These had all become a terrifyingly regular occurrence. Isaiah had braced himself for backlash, but not like this. This wasn't just about his career or his reputation anymore. Now it was about something much more personal, his family's safety. Denise, usually so composed, was beginning to show the strain. Her calm demeanor was now clouded with worry, and Isaiah noticed it in the way she flinched at the smallest sound, the way her eyes flickered with fear whenever the door creaked open. She tried to hide it, to remain strong, but he saw through it. He always did. One night, as they sat at the kitchen table, dinner cold and forgotten, she spoke with a tremor in her voice. "You should go to the police." Isaiah's response was swift, his voice firm yet laced with a hint of exhaustion. "I can't. They're part of this. We can't trust anyone on the inside." Denise sighed, her hands shaking as she reached for her glass of water. "So what do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Isaiah clenched his fists, frustration boiling up. "We stay strong. We keep pushing. We've exposed them, and now they're scared. They want us to back down, but we can't." Denise's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she reached for his hand, her voice breaking. "I just don't want to lose you, Isaiah. Promise me you'll be careful." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently, his heart heavy with the weight of the promise he was about to make. "I promise." Meanwhile, Aaron had taken refuge in a motel on the outskirts of town, hiding in plain sight. He knew the storm they had stirred up wasn't going to pass quietly, and it was only a matter of time before it got worse. One night, as he sat in his dingy motel room, his phone buzzed. He expected another threat, but this time, it was Lisa Chun from the news station. "Aaron, I just got word from one of my sources," Lisa said, her voice tense with urgency. "There's a warrant out for your arrest." Aaron froze, his blood running cold. "What? For what?" "Tampering with evidence in a previous case," she explained. "It's a setup. They're coming for you, Aaron." His heart hammered in his chest, a sickening realization sinking in. This was it. He had known it was coming, but the gut punch still left him reeling. They were trying to discredit him, to silence him before he could do any more damage. "Thanks for the heads up, Lisa," Aaron managed to say, his voice tight. "I'll figure something out." He hung up, his mind racing. They were closing in on him. And if he didn't act fast, it would be too late. He couldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. With determination, Aaron packed his things and slipped out of the motel room. His eyes scanned the parking lot, searching for any sign of danger. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to fight back. The next morning, Isaiah received a call from Aaron. His friend's voice was strained, weighed down by the enormity of the situation. "They're after me," Aaron said. "I've got a warrant out for my arrest." Isaiah's heart sank. "For what?" "Tampering with evidence." "It's all fabricated, Isaiah. They're trying to take me down." Isaiah gritted his teeth, anger flashing through him. "Where are you?" "I can't stay in one place too long," Aaron replied. "But we need to do something. They're trying to make us disappear. To make this all go away." Isaiah's mind began to race, a plan forming already. "We'll fight this, Aaron. But we need more than just what we've got. We need someone higher up, someone who can blow this wide open." There was a pause, then Aaron spoke again, his voice low and filled with the weight of his secret. "There's one more thing, Isaiah. Something I didn't tell you." Isaiah's brow furrowed. "What is it?" "I got a tip from someone inside. There's more going on here than just corruption. Apex Builders, they've been involved in something bigger. And it's connected to the police department. It's not just about covering up violations. It's about controlling the town." Isaiah felt a chill run down his spine. What are you talking about? There's a network, Isaiah. A web of people who've been running this town from the shadows for years. Apex Builders is just the front. The real power lies with the people pulling the strings. And they'll do anything to keep it that way. Isaiah's grip on the phone tightened, his pulse quickening. Who's behind it? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out, Aaron replied. I just need time. Isaiah's mind spun. This was bigger than he had imagined. Much bigger. It wasn't just about a corrupt police department or a shady construction company. No, this was something far more dangerous. Something that could destroy everything they had worked for. Be careful, Aaron, Isaiah said, his voice thick with concern. We're in deep now. I know, Aaron answered, his voice resolute. But we're not backing down. Isaiah hung up, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What Aaron had just told him changed everything. If Apex Builders was a front for something bigger, the corruption went deeper than they had ever suspected. And now Aaron was in hiding, with a fabricated arrest warrant hanging over his head. The stakes had just been raised, and Isaiah knew that they were in a fight for their lives. Denise entered the room, sensing the storm brewing inside him. What is it? She asked gently, concern etched across her face. Isaiah sighed, his heart heavy. It's worse than we thought, Denise. Aaron uncovered more. Apex Builders is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole network of people running this town. And they're pulling the strings from the shadows. Denise's eyes widened in shock. Isaiah, what are you going to do? Isaiah met her gaze, his jaw set with determination. I don't know yet. But I can't back down. Not now. Denise stepped closer, her hands reaching for his. You're not alone in this. Just be careful, please. Isaiah nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He pulled her into a tight embrace, drawing strength from the love they shared. He knew this battle was far from over, but he also knew that he couldn't stop fighting, not until justice was served. The next morning, Isaiah sat in his office, staring at the documents spread out before him. They had enough evidence to expose the corruption in Winterdale, but now that Aaron had uncovered the deeper conspiracy, everything felt far more dangerous. If there were powerful figures behind Apex Builders, they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. Isaiah picked up the phone and dialed the number of an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, but who he knew could help. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. Isaiah Carm, long time, said Joseph, an attorney who had once worked in the state's attorney general's office. I need your help, Joseph, Isaiah said, cutting straight to the point. I've uncovered something big. Corruption in the police department, bribes, falsified reports. It's all connected to a local construction company, but it goes deeper. I need someone who can take this to the highest level. Someone I can trust. There was a long pause, then Joseph's voice came back, low and serious. You're serious about this? I wouldn't be calling you if I wasn't, Isaiah replied. Please, Joseph. I need you. I'll take a look at what you've got, Joseph said. But Isaiah, be careful. You're playing with fire. I know, Isaiah muttered, his voice hard with resolve. But this needs to be done. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Protests raged outside the police station and city hall, the town demanding answers. The broadcast had sparked a firestorm, and there was no putting it out. But the threats against Isaiah and Aaron were escalating. Strange cars, anonymous calls, a sense of danger looming over them at every turn. It was like a ticking time bomb. And then one evening, as Isaiah left the courthouse, a black SUV pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a man in a suit with a cold, calculating gaze. Judge Carr, the man said smoothly, his voice dripping with menace, a word of advice. Walk away while you still can. Isaiah's heart pounded, but his resolve didn't waver. I'm not walking away. The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. That's unfortunate. You're making this personal. Isaiah clenched his fists. This is about justice. And I'm not afraid of you. The man's smile faded, his eyes hardening. You should be. Without another word, the SUV sped off, leaving Isaiah standing in the street, pulse racing. He knew then that he couldn't wait any longer. The people behind Apex Builders weren't going to let this go quietly. And now that they had made their threats personal, he had to act fast. That night, he met with Joseph and Lisa Chen. They gathered in a small conference room, poring over documents, planning their next move. "We have everything we need," Joseph said, his voice steady. "The evidence is airtight. We'll take this to the state's attorney general's office tomorrow morning. Once it goes public, there's no turning back." Isaiah nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Let's do it." Just as they were about to leave, Isaiah's phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. "I've got the final piece. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. Isaiah's stomach twisted. The warehouse on 5th Street was a rundown, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It was the last place anyone would want to meet, especially at night. He showed the message to Joseph and Lisa. His voice was tense. "Aaron wants to meet. He says he has the final piece." Joseph frowned. It could be a trap. Isaiah shook his head, determined. "It's Aaron. I trust him." Lisa nodded, though her expression was tight with concern. "Then let's go. But we need to be careful." They arrived at the warehouse a few minutes later, the shadows stretching long in the dim light. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the old building sent a chill down Isaiah's spine. They stepped inside, moving quietly, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the darkness. It was Aaron, but something was wrong. His clothes were torn, and his face was pale, bruised. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, but he was alive. "Isaiah, you need to listen to me," Aaron said, his voice raspy, desperate. "They know everything. They're coming for you. They're coming for both of us." Isaiah's heart raced. Who's behind this?" Aaron's eyes were wide with fear. "They're too powerful. You can't beat them. They'll kill us all to protect their secrets." Before Isaiah could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. A figure appeared at the door. It was the man from the SUV, and he wasn't alone. Isaiah's blood ran cold.